Did he get it back?
No. So what they do is they get this black market app. They can open any OnStar, so they just walk around.
Hello, welcome everyone. So good to see you. No, right. Hello.
Hello. Hello. Up to the mouth. We'll start over. Hello, welcome everyone. So good to see everyone, and we have an awesome speaker that I know everyone's looking forward to hearing from. And it definitely feels good inside, correct? Yeah. Having a little heat wave. Everyone's been blaming me that I brought it back from Las Vegas. It was hot out there. It was like baking. It was hot. You could cook on the pavement. But hopefully, you know, in Texas, next week will be different. So just hang on.
Yeah,
It'll be cold next week, or we pray that happens. But we're going to go ahead and start the meeting, and we will be led in prayer. Dr. Lamar.
Okay, as we go to our time of prayer today, we need to remember Neil and Sandra.
Yeah.
We don't know this for certain, but we have heard from several sources that they fell this week and ended up in the hospital. Probably what it was that Neil fell and Sandra tried to pick him up, and then she fell. When you're dead weight, in your head.
Yeah.
So we lift them up. And then after the prayer, I have a couple of other things to share with you. So if you'd stand and join me in the spirit of prayer. Oh God, we give you thanks for the blessings of this day. It's hot outside, but it's still spring. It's not going to be summer officially until next week. But we give you thanks for this day, for this club, for our work, for the flag program that is currently in operation in Jenna Long. We ask your spirit to be upon us, to bless our work in this community, to bless this club, to bless the food that has been prepared and is before us, and to keep us in your peace. In the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Now, because we don't have anyone here to lead the singing, today is Bobby Haas's birthday. Hey. So let's do a rendition of Happy Birthday.
Happy
birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bobby. Happy birthday to you. Yeah!
Name of the prophet, he's 39 and old. You can be seated down. I'll give you the list of our guests. We have Aaron Olson, who is a guest of, she says, Lindy Kimberly, but I think you're your dad's guest. You're just going to tap off him.
Well, we'll be there.
Christina Rodriguez is here. Yay.
Okay.
Heather Chapman, who is the guest of Ryan May.
Yep.
Right. Carrie Perkins, who is our guest speaker, is with us. Yes. And Debbie Carter is a guest with us. Give them all a
Thank you, sir.
yes, ma'am.
And now we will have pledge allegiance, and who would like to help me lead that? Thank you, Rick.
Could all please rise? Put your hand over your heart. Join me in honoring our flag and our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, that was fast. We went right into the speaker. So, Ryan,
God bless America.
Oh.
Shane, you gonna do it?
And would you like to come forward and sing it?
Actually, we're gonna sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game."
That's short.
All right, that's short.
And you know, you may not have heard, but the Astros had two pitchers that had immaculate rounds. They got 9 strikeouts.
Nice.
Two immaculate, what is
Innings.
Immaculate innings.
Two.
9 pitches.
Yeah.
It was the same 3 batters.
Yes.
No
So
way.
sorry for the Rangers, but I'm excited for my Astros. So let's sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never get back, for it's root for the Astros. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Thank you, Brad.
Outstanding. I don't think we've never missed an opportunity for Shane to sing. It just does not happen, right? It just does not happen. So guys, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today. We're all very blessed, not only with our own talents and gifts, but the people we meet along the way. And what's been fascinating about our speaker here is that she's not only got a great story of how she's come to where she's at, but she's also a Rotary Peace Fellowship Award winner. She's going to be utilizing that to do some amazing work for humanity around the world. And but her story and the things she shared gives us inspiration into what we can do each day with the people that we meet and the lives that interact. So without further ado, let's introduce our speaker, Dr. Carrie Perkins.
Just 1 second, I think I've got a slideshow for you.
And you may have to hold that mic right up to your.
All right, hi everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about refugee and refugee resettlement in Dallas-Fort Worth. My name is Dr. Carrie Perkins. Just a little bit about me, and thank you for that introduction, Ryan. I am a 2022 Rotary International Global Peace Fellow, which means Rotary will be supporting some of my research on the Thai-Myanmar border with refugees from Myanmar, which is an extension of my doctoral work that I completed with SMU. I also am a visiting fellow at the University of Oxford's Refugee Study Center, and most currently I will be taking a position at the University of California, Irving in the fall, continuing working in Southeast Asian diasporic refugee networks. So I very much live and breathe refugees and refugee resettlements, but I came to this work originally working in Dallas-Fort Worth with refugees that had come here.
Yeah, there you go.
So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about refugee resettlement within Dallas. A lot of people don't know how many refugees we actually have here in our own backyard. Texas is the #1 state of refugee resettlement in the country, which sometimes surprises people. But for the past 10 years, we have resettled more refugees than anything else combined. So before I start talking a little bit about refugees, I find that it's helpful to just give you a little bit of background on some terminology. For those of us that don't sort of live and breathe refugee issues every day, it's easy to interchange these terms. But it is important to make the distinction, especially as we're talking about refugees, who they actually are. So just a little bit of brief terminology. If you know this already, please forgive me. But just quickly, if I use the word immigrants, essentially I am talking about a person that comes to a country with the intention of staying there permanently. When we talk about a migrant, the difference there is that a migrant is usually somebody that goes back and forth across borders. This is usually related to things like seasonal migration, labor migration, etc. And when we talk about a refugee, within the context especially of refugees in the US, this is very much a legal term. When we say a refugee, this means somebody that has been determined to have a well-founded fear of persecution or a fear of their life. They are being persecuted for things like their religion, their ethnicity, their political beliefs, etc. And they have crossed an international border seeking protection. So specifically, if I talk about a refugee within Dallas-Fort Worth, they have gone through a very lengthy process called refugee status determination, which essentially means it's about a 19 to 20 step process where you are interviewed by the UNHCR, you go through an interview and background check with the US Department of Homeland Security, biometrics, all of these sorts of things, to determine that you do have what is called a well-founded fear. So if you come to the US under the Refugee Resettlement Program, it's probably taken upwards of 2 to sometimes 10 years to go through that lengthy vetting process. You usually spend that time waiting in a refugee camp that is run, usually by the UNHCR, the host country, the international border that you have fled. And if you come to the US under the US Refugee Resettlement Scheme, you have a legal right to live here in the US. Essentially, you have a permanent resident green card. You are able to file for citizenship within 5 years. You have a legal right to work in the country. You can live anywhere. You are a legal resident within the US. So this is sometimes sort of mixed up when we're talking about our national right. Yes, thank you, sir. So specifically, when we're talking about refugees, again, it's important to make that distinction because often we hear refugees that are coming here. Somebody has refugee status, they're illegal. They have gone through a very intense background check. The difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker is that that asylum seeker is also seeking protection, but they have not yet gone through a process of refugee status determination. They do not have legal status. They are waiting to have their day in court. They are trying to prove that. And then you have an IDP, and this stands for an internally displaced person. IDP means you have not left your country's borders, but you have been displaced by things like war, persecution, and often natural disasters. So several years ago, if you will remember Hurricane Katrina, we had many Americans that came to Texas, right, as a result of that hurricane. And the news often erroneously referred to them as hurricane refugees. That's a misuse of that term. They're technically internally displaced persons. They are still American citizens. They've only crossed a state. So just a little bit of terminology so we're on the same page when we're talking about refugees again, some legal status. So who are refugees? Like I said, they have been determined to have a well-founded fear. By the end of 2021, the refugee crisis has expanded exponentially. We have more refugees today than we have ever had in our history. There are currently close to 85 million people that have been forced to flee their homes, and that breaks down to over 53.2 refugees that have been granted refugee status. More than half of those are children. 27.1 are refugees, 53.2 have been internally displaced within their countries, and then 4.6 million asylum seekers. In 2022, we have seen that number increase as related to the conflict in Ukraine. If we're thinking about refugee resettlement and who comes to Dallas as a refugee, there are several hotspots across the globe that the US generally resettles refugees from. If you'll remember in 2015, as a result of the Syrian civil war, we had many refugees from Iraq, Syria, and that region that were resettled. Myanmar, Burma, in Southeast Asia, which is specifically the area that I do research in, had a very large resettlement program in the US history from 2003 to about 2014. We resettled about 80,000 refugees from Myanmar. A very large percentage of those came here to Texas. Next one. All right, so refugee resettlement, sorry, for some reason that I'm not saying. So just a little look at the history of refugee resettlement in our country. So I don't know if you can see the graph, but you can see we actually started our program in 1981, but it was a couple years prior to that that we began bringing refugees here in mass, and that was specifically related to the Vietnam War. So in 1976, we started bringing in Vietnamese refugees and also some refugees from Cambodia, but we did not start our official refugee resettlement program until 1981. And you can see that the number that's represented in orange was about 210,000. That is the highest number of refugees that we have ever resettled during a single fiscal year. Every year, that blue line represents what's called an annual ceiling. The US president sets that amount of how many refugees we're allowed to bring in. They do allow for emergencies, situations usually between 25 to 50,000, depending if there's another conflict that's going on globally. So you can see sort of what's happened since we started this Refugee Resettlement Program in '81, and you can see the sort of fluxes and changes that have gone on over the years. Specifically, if you look right after 2000, you can see there in 2001, we're at one of our lowest levels. And of course, what happened in 2001? September 11th, right? And so you can see a stark reaction in our country and dropping that number of refugees. If you follow that along, you can also see what happened in 2016, which of course is when Donald Trump was elected and essentially tried to completely stop the refugee resettlement country in the US. The presidential annual ceiling went down to the lowest it's ever been. And then starting in 2021, you can see Biden has raised that ceiling back up. And I think this year it's set at probably, I think it's at 125 now, including Ukraine. So we'll see in the next couple of years, right? But so as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Texas is actually the largest state in refugee resettlement, and it's how I began working with refugees myself. If you look specifically between the years of 2010 and 2019, Texas essentially resettled 10% of all refugees that have arrived in the US. We resettled approximately 57,000 refugees. I like to say Dallas is number one. Technically, if you look at the numbers, Houston's number one, but if you put Dallas and Fort Worth together, we have been sort of the leading area of refugee resettlement. This is really helped by the fact that every major refugee resettlement agency has a headquarters here in Texas. So the International Rescue Committee, Catholic Charities, Refugee Services of Texas, and then some smaller, what we call VOLAGs or voluntary agencies, all have offices and operate here. This is also aided by the large hearts of Texans, people that are very much committed to welcoming new Americans and welcoming their neighbors, and also the input of several charitable organizations that donate their time, their dollars, their volunteer hours to help in refugee resettlement. And so what does that actually look like? What does it look like to help with refugee resettlement in Texas? I started about 10 years ago as a family mentor for the International Rescue Committee here in Dallas-Fort Worth. There's an area in town that's called Vickery Meadow, and it's right across the highway from North Park Mall. And within about a 3-mile square radius, there are 29 different languages that are spoken. Many refugees are resettled into low-income apartments in that area. Another area, a little bit northern area, there's some additional apartments there. And what that means, if you volunteer for these organizations, is that you often will pick up families from the airport upon their first arrival to Texas, bring them to their new apartment, show them how things work. Many refugees have spent years, decades, and sometimes their entire lives in refugee camps and are not familiar with how things like modern appliances operate. And so it's really important to have a guide and a mentor to help acclimate you to what life is like, not only in Texas, but in the US. Many of the refugees I work with from Burma, Myanmar, in a camp called Mela, have been in that camp. The camp's been open for 38 years. So many of the refugees that I meet that come here were born inside that camp. They've never stepped foot in Myanmar. They are legally not allowed to reside in Thailand. So once they receive that resettlement package, they come to the US, but as you can imagine, it's quite a culture shock. The US provides, currently, as of 2022, we have reopened our federal match grant program, which provides assistance to help get people going. This usually provides about 3, sometimes in the very best circumstances, up to 6 months of rental assistance to help them in those new apartments. There are often volunteer-led ESL classes to help people learn English, and then you are matched with an employment coordinator. However, there's a very intense emphasis to have refugees obtain employment as soon as possible. They have to become self-sufficient because this funding runs out incredibly quickly. So a lot of this is centered around finding a job where somebody can find a sustainable income, can hopefully provide for their family, et cetera. During this reception and placement period, as I said, this is largely volunteer run. And you can see people within these organizations doing anything from teaching English to helping people navigate very complex paperwork about filing for things like SNAP or housing aid, all of these other social programs that they are eligible for as refugees. Again, we know refugees have legal status to be here in the country. Many of these organizations are often strapped for things like donations. Every refugee that comes here usually comes with just one bag of the clothes that they have on their back, a couple personal items, but they come with no furniture, no money. They are essentially starting over from nothing. So many organizations do help furnish those apartments. The IRC in Dallas has an entire warehouse where people can get furniture donations, vacuum cleaners, pots, pans, all of these sorts of things. But there is always a need for that type of work. And as I said, Texas has really been leading the way, by and large part, really the generous hearts of many Texans and the very service-oriented emphasis that organizations such as Rotary promote, which is really, really helpful. Essentially, you also have what are called welcome teams, which are groups of people that will assist either a specific neighborhood or a specific family and help guide them for a period of months. They will sign up to commit to usually a minimum of 6 months of being this cultural guide to sometimes take people to a grocery store or explain the way the school system works. How do you register your kid for an after-school program? Helping them read some of these letters that come through the mail that are quite confusing. And so these types of activities really help families become self-sufficient. This mentorship is really important when we start looking at career laddering and refugees becoming contributing members to a society really, really rapidly. And then finally, I'd like to sort of end with this quote, because as we're thinking about resettlement and this type of work that is available here at our back door, it's important that we continue to tell our friends and neighbors about the refugees that live here in Dallas-Fort Worth from all different parts of the globe, because it's important for us to continue this narrative of civic responsibility and civic engagement. These are new Americans, and by welcoming them and welcoming them to our communities, it really creates an advantageous knock-on effect. Resettlement takes place very much at the local level. It happens between these one-on-one interactions. We are meeting with a family, and you are telling them that you are welcome here. We want to welcome you into our communities. We want to welcome you into our schools, into our homes. And those one-on-one interactions are incredibly powerful and have quite a domino effect for other refugee settlements in the country. So I think this sums it up well, where it says there has to be a concerted effort to make sure everyone understands why refugees have arrived, what are they fleeing, understanding the civil wars and the conflicts and the reasons that people have left their homes. Often people dream of returning home, but that is no longer a possibility. So they are trying to forge a new path forward. But it's important for us to welcome them and then to really be cognizant of all of the contributions that refugees make in making our country multicultural. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Hopefully this is just a brief overview about resettlement. Again, thank you very much to Rotary. I very much appreciate Rotary's support also in my research in Southeast Asia. And yeah, any questions? Thank you. Sure.
Really a question. I want to see the graph again. I'm really curious to see where we are currently, like where the limit is for refugees and where we're currently at in 2020. That's pretty significant. It's like there's a lot of room for people.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
you get the impression that we have no more room. And so it's eye-opening, and I appreciate that graph.
Yeah. I think it's, thank you, and it is really informative, especially if you look at what's happening with the annual ceiling that is set by the president. When you think about just the impact of elections and who's in charge, that this is a very sort of concrete example of that impact that immediately happens every year. So as soon as Biden was elected, he set the cap right at about 75,000, and that was his first year in office. As I said, I think we're at 125 right now. As we will be accepting refugees from Ukraine, and we also had a program of accepting refugees from Afghanistan. As I mentioned earlier, refugee resettlement is predicated on a very lengthy vetting process. We resettled many refugees from Afghanistan very quickly because they were already working for the US military, which means they had gone through a biometric check. So they were working with us as translators or other people on the ground. And so we were able to expedite several of those families to come immediately after the Taliban took back control in that region. But in general, it's an incredibly lengthy process. Refugees I've worked with in Myanmar have waited upwards of a decade to receive approval to come here. And I also must note that less than 2% of the world's refugees ever get resettled. So the majority of them will sit in camps in what are called protracted refugee situations that go on for more than 5 years. The UNHCR has what are called 3 durable solutions, where voluntary repatriation is thought of as the best, most logical and cost-efficient solution, which means people just go back to their homes. Unfortunately, this is often impossible as wars sort of rage on. We're sort of looking at what's happening in Syria right now in relation to that. And then host integration is the second solution, and that is largely dependent on the country where refugees have fled. So I currently am working with Thailand on their host integration to see if they will regularize status for refugees. Currently, the public support is very low for that. Unfortunately, as a result of COVID, you've seen a lot of discourse around refugees from Myanmar being dirty or carrying disease into the country or taking jobs or something along those lines. So you really have to have public support within that host country to allow them to come in as well. Sorry, that was a very long answer, but
No, that's good.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Do the refugees get to choose where they go? They have any say so? I know they're just probably happy to be going somewhere different, but.
Generally, no. So there's a couple countries that offer resettlement programs. So the US resettles the majority of the world's refugees, but there are resettlement programs in Australia. Canada has a really interesting refugee resettlement program where private individuals or organizations can sponsor that resettlement. The US currently does not allow that. The UK takes some refugees. I don't know if you're following the news, but they are in a really, I'll choose my words wisely here, but they're in an interesting situation where they have sent refugees on a plane to Rwanda recently, trying to move them out of the country. Generally, a refugee will apply for resettlement and the UNHCR will pick which country they would qualify for and send them. So generally, no, they don't have a choice. They can decline though if they, say, I really don't want to go to Australia. That generally doesn't happen.
Because we volunteer in all languages.
Yes.
Clearly, otherwise, how do you communicate? How do you make that settlement easier?
Yes, so IRC Catholic Charities are always looking for people that speak a multitude of languages, whether it's Arabic or Spanish. If you have any Southeast Asian languages, these are incredibly valuable. They will snatch you up and take any volunteer minute you have available to help with translation. There is, in recent years, thankfully, this 800 number has been developed where you can call in and get a translator for any language. This is used primarily in the medical setting. So the funding primarily goes to Parkland, where they can call and get translation for whoever about an ailment. But I taught ESL for a couple of years for IRC and Catholic Charities. And when I'm teaching an English level class, I have people all the way from the level of having zero English at all to people that were, fairly fluent, but they're all sitting in the same classroom, and you can imagine, and they all speak different languages. I had 7 different countries represented in my one class. So you can represent how frustrating it is to try to learn English that way, right? So yes, volunteers are always needed, especially bilingual volunteers.
Any more questions?
Do you have a personal story of success that you have dealt with?
Related to a refugee I've worked with? Yeah, sure, absolutely. So many of the refugees that I work with, as I mentioned, a lot of them have spent their lives in refugee camps, but many refugees will say the reason that they chose to make this change or come to the US is because they want a better life for their children. And so when the children come, they are often placed in DISD, and just generally children pick up the language so much quicker than their parents. They become acclimated, they become sort of immersed in the culture, and they very quickly act as translators for their parents, and really some of them really thrive. So I was working with a family, a Rohingya family, which is a Muslim minority from the western side of Myanmar. And they had a child that was about 11 when I met them. And she went on to work with me. I remember her helping in the beginning with some easy translations, but we got her in the after-school program at TISD, which works often with refugee kids. Anyway, she got a full ride scholarship to UNT last year, 2 years ago. And so anyway, she's doing great now. But and there's lots of success stories like that. And so at UNT specifically, they actually have a club that is for children of immigrant parents and also refugees, about making refugees welcome on campus, informing the community. That she was an ambassador for the Refugee Settlement, and she's done a great job. And I was like in tears when she got that scholarship. But it's amazing what education and those sorts of things can do. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to talk to you all.
Always good to hear from someone that has a passion, that makes a difference with individuals that almost have zero hope and just needing someone that cares or can lead them in the correct direction to receive resources and try to start over. So thank you, that's tremendous. Does anyone have an announcement that you would like to share? Yes, Carrie?
A couple of flyers. Urban Cares is hosting a program.
I'd rather hear your beautiful We have several on Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to let you know about a program that is going on right now at Irving Cares. While we know kids are out of school for the summer, the request for food pantry orders is significantly higher. And there's been a couple of things happen in the community recently that has even increased those requests even more. So we have a program called Summer Squeeze, and we just asked different organizations, communities, church groups to host a food drive, and that helps the food pantry for these higher summer requests. So I have a flyer if anybody's interested in having one. So thanks so much.
Cool. Thanks, Jerry.
That's another resource that's so needed, and thank you, Carrie, for keeping us informed and reminding us that there are families, individuals that do not have food. Thank you. Any other announcements, Rick?
Madam President, I'll give you an update on the flag program. We're not.
Sound good.
Okay.
Zoom can hear you.
Yeah, the Zoom people can hear you.
I can repeat everything you say, but you can do it more eloquently.
Much more Rick version.
No, thank you. Congratulations to all of you. Great job on the flags. We're well over 1,600. I know we were working towards 2,000, but 1,600 is quite an accomplishment. Should be over $60,000 in the bank. So is monitoring that. Congratulations to the new Rotarian flag teams.
Yeah.
Ryan out there putting out flags the other day, and he went by and straightened some at University Hills, which I appreciate. I had the opportunity to work with you, Madam President, and watched her jump out and grab those flags. Well, quite the Energizer bunny there at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, Rick.
But a real hats off to the, what do we call them, the South Side girls?
South Irving girls.
South.
What?
South Irving girls.
South Irving girls. They're not all here today, but the captain of that team and the cheerleader, the supervisor over the ones that do a lot of the hard work, Donna, Sylvia. Now those girls have taken their 39 flag route. Is that?
Wow.
35.
35. They use the drill. They've installed sleeves. As of yet, we've had no calls about broken fiber optics or water irrigation. City of Irving has not called and wanted to know what's going on. I will tell you that we had one episode where the incoming president-elect that left, but he was installing the sleeve on your route at Jeff Cober's. A lot of y'all know Jeff, but he was installing the sleeve at Jeff's mother's house. And it must have been in the afternoon, about 102. And so Jeff's mother calls and says, Jeff, there's a guy that's passed out in my front yard. He's down on his hands and knees. You gotta come help him. So Jeff runs across the street, and there's the Reverend Shane trying to beat that sleeve into the hard ground up there off of Britain. So there's a lot of good stories out there. Jose and Ed McCarty helped me install the 28 and straighten up the 28 at Grand Treviso. So that's 28 times $30. Do the quick math.
Yeah.
About 840 or some number like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, so that's pure profit for us.
I was just thinking, maybe we didn't reach the number, but maybe we increased the volume of the revenue.
I think that's a good point. By
That would still
the
be-
teams taking over, which will be a win for us.
Yes, if we gain 20%.
Yeah, so congratulations to all of y'all. Bob has done a great job of, Bob, you just came back from Montana where I heard it was snowing yesterday morning. Would you care to elaborate on why you came back?
Good question.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, but I'm gonna get you, Doctor. But yeah, so the flag program, I think, is healthy. I went down and counted, there's 68 last week to be repaired. And so I think the Reverend Bill LeBar has already cut apart some of those. And there's a lot of work to be done to prepare for July 4th. And so Ed and Jose and I will pull Millennium Fountain at 72. I'll probably go pull the ones at Grand Treviso today, inspect those as I'm pulling, put them in Bill's section. But I think we have plenty of sleeves to be cut. We have flags. And so, yeah, I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us to prepare for July 4th. So just right quick, I'm just filling in if that's okay. Tomorrow afternoon, I will take some of our new poles and I'm going to install new Texas flags that I purchased from the flag manufacturing company on 183. Simons or Simmons, whatever it is. So I went in and visited with those folks. Their flags are beautiful and they're $25 a piece. And so maybe if we bought, Bob, maybe if we bought 500, we might get some break, but their products are expensive. Quality's good, they're beautiful flags.
That's a long way from $3 a piece.
Yeah, it's a long ways from
We'll
there.
have to go a lot.
Ours are made, ours are now made in Taiwan, not China. We're using the code word Taiwan, but no, we've got to make some decisions about pricing strategy. And you and I talked about that last week. And I've talked to the gentleman Bill Baxter, who runs the software. And I think as the Rotary organization in District 5810, we've got to take a look and say, where are we all on pricing? Because we can't jump from 50 to 100. We might jump from 50 to 60. We might jump 50 to 75. We've got to think this through. So with the inflation and people are already feeling a lot of the crunch on their money, we've got to be careful what we do. But the good news is Lazaro gave me the money to pay for 12 Texas flags. And he is going to, for the use of our U.S. flags, for this big event that's going to be at Levy Plaza on Saturday. We will put those 12 Texas flags on our poles. I'm going to pull 12 of our new best U.S. flags. I'll probably pull about 20. So if you show up at that event, you'll see our flags, our U.S. flags, and some of the Texas flags. And then I will cut his off, fold them up, and present those back to him. What he's doing for us is he is having 2 large banners, which we've talked about in your board meeting. And so he's having some banners made with the Rotary logo, our name. They're going to be placed at the event as we are part of the program, part of the sponsorship. So always working with Laz to have a great event.
Are you guys gonna have a tent or a table? I think we have a table. No?
I can't answer that. I didn't ask Laz. There's tickets available if you want to go, and we'd like to have everybody show up. It's I think he said 17 or 18 of the top barbecue places in the state of Texas, and like 7 or 8 bands that are going to start at 1 and play till 10. What's the one up, the famous 80s band, La Freak?
La Freak, yeah.
Yeah, La Freak's going to be there. Then there's another good Irving band. I think that's right. Leo Hall's going to be there. It'll be a fun day. Yeah. So anyway, my report is we have money, and that's good because Robert Alsop and I are going to meet, and all the past presidents, you're invited. We're going to meet with incoming President Webb on the 20th and looking to help him put his strategic plan together using what you had used. And then also Dave Harris is going to provide a budget through the month of May, and that'll help get Shane up and rolling on what do I want to do next year and do I have the money? Madam President, that concludes my comments.
One more.
I'm sorry, I thought I covered what you wanted to cover. You're always not at a loss for words.
That's the kettle playing in the pot. The flags have taken an extraordinary beating with the winds this year. And so I've been working on disassembling flags. I've done a couple of duties now. And I'm going to do that again Saturday, but I would anticipate that we will need to have 1 day of rebuilding flags for just in case, so that we don't get called down on July the 4th to build flags. So everybody mark your calendar. A week from this Saturday, we'll probably need to build flags for an hour. We'll work from 8 to 9. And so just put it on your schedule if you possibly can. And if Mara's listening, Mara, get it out. We'll probably need to build flags a week from Saturday, and we'll work just for an hour, okay? Because it's too hot to do anything else.
June 25th. June 25th.
June 25th, that's right. Which is just before it's a week before the 4th of July holiday, isn't it? Yeah, okay. All right.
Oh, food. I just heard something.
What?
We might get breakfast tacos.
Oh, everything's better with tacos.
I have experienced those breakfast tacos. They are worth the price of admission.
Okay. Food always gets more volunteers, right? Rick put a little info in my ear and wanted me to ask the past president that's on Zoom, is it snowing where you're at? Raise up your finger if it's snowing, or is it hot?
I thought he might be frozen.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Rick wanted to know, because he happens to know you're at the Glacier National Park. So enjoy. Sorry we can't hear you, but
It was
enjoy.
41.
You said it's 40 degrees.
40 degrees. Oh, why did we ask?
41.
Feels like 140 here.
And
Okay,
wonder
well,
why I'm at home.
enjoy, we miss you and have fun. And let's see, who would like to help me with, well, first of all, let me say a couple of things before we have a 4-way test. We are scheduled to have a board meeting after this meeting. However, we need 5 to
Yeah.
even
For
make
quorum.
it work.
Yeah.
So I don't think we do. So we'll have to postpone that. And then our next meeting, next Thursday at noon, will be my end of President year closing comments and recognizing the board members and leaders that have helped me to enjoy a very successful year, and so appreciative. So we'll do that next Thursday, and then the following Thursday, our new president, Shane Webb, will introduce his board and also his goals for the new year. So be sure to be here, and now we'll close with the 4-way test. And who would like to help me lead the 4-way test? Robert, no, here, Bobby, thank you so much.
Four-way test. Number 1.
Is it true? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you, everyone, and the meeting is adjourned.
All right, thank you, Linda.